Hi, my name is Misael Garcia, and I'm going to start answering the next 10 questions regarding the product owner and business analyst position that I am applying for. Okay, the first question is what steps are required to develop a product from an idea? First, it is important to have an analysis about the market, and we need to have the market analysis. Also, we need to have the competitor analysis. When from these two inputs, we are going to create a SWOT analysis that will use what we know about the market and the competitors analysis to have an analysis based on the strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. That will imply to give us a better view of how our idea is going to be converted into a product. After that, we are developing personas. The personas is very important because with the personas, we reflect the users and how the product will be used by the users. We also need to deploy the strategy vision and the feature sets. Also, we need to prioritize these features when we are using the Agile, for example. By the Agile, using the Scrum Master, with Scrum, we need to use the product backlog and prioritize the user stories in the product backlog. And for that, we also have the user stories or use cases, and we develop after that the logical data model, and we continue by developing our idea into a product by implementing the persona to use case mapping. From this, when we do the persona to use case mapping, we understand which usage scenarios are going to be happening and will be bucketed by each persona. Also, next step will be the screen mockups or storyboards, and this kind of steps helps the developer to understand and to have a very clear process of the screen mockups. And also with these storyboards, the teams can iterate through the screens designing process. After that, it's important to maintain the product backlog that I already mentioned it, and the product owner we are accountable of, and the only member of in the case of the Scrum methodology, Scrum framework, and only the product owner can modify and can prioritize the stories in the product backlog. And after we have defined all these steps, we start with the iterations. All the iterations have the logical specification. We have test cases, and we have the physical design specifications. And after that, the developers start writing the code. And after we have the first release, or we have the unit testing, the system integration testing, regression testing, and after the tests are passed, the deployment of the code is executed, and that's the step when the first iteration stops and we start the next iteration. And during the iterations, we need to execute metrics and monitoring, and we need to establish also strategies for the scalability of this project. Okay, for the second question is, in your previous experience, what kind of documents have you created for projects? Okay, I have to tell you that I have participated in several projects, and also I have been involved in the developing of different documents. One of them is the project vision document. This project vision document has to be managed by the project manager, and as my previous experience as project manager, I have been working on that, and also as a product owner or a business analyst, you have to participate in this document because you can provide details like the product overview and the requirements, the product features, and the product requirements that you will be using. Also, there is a document called the requirement management plan. In that document, you specify how are you going to be acquiring the requirements and how are you going to be managing the project requirements. and that's very important. How do you define the strategy to get the requirements? And when you are getting the requirements, and you also develop the documents called user stories, because the user stories are more used in the agile methodology, also and the Scrum framework. And when you write down the user stories, you have to detail what, how, and who will be doing the functionality or the requirement that you are describing with the user stories. And when you have a use case, you also write the use case, and you have the business requirement document. This is the most important, because in the business requirement document you detail what do you want, and you gather all the information about the requirements, all the details that you need, and you have to ensure that you have a good requirement there. You have the functional requirement specification, the FRS document, the functional specification document, the system requirement specification, also known as the system requirement document. And you might also be not developing but understanding the test case documents, because you need to know what is going to be tested and how it's going to be tested. And that is basically the documents I have been involved. Also, I want to add that as a product owner, we are accountable of the product backlog, and we have to maintain that document, and it's a live document, because all the requirements are updated there, and you have to provide in that document the level of each importance of each document, of each requirement or each user story. Okay, the third question is, can you name the tools that are helpful for business analysts? Actually, there's several tools that you can use for business analysts, and I will just name some of them that I've used. We have the stakeholder matrix, we have the stakeholder RACI matrix, that is the responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed matrix, and the stakeholder onion diagram that also you use to know how the stakeholders are prioritized in an onion way, and like in onion layers. And you have the prioritization Moscow technique. The prioritization Moscow technique has involved the information of how the requirements must be prioritized, because the must have is for more, the should have, the could have, and won't have is the Moscow acronyms, and that's the way you can prioritize the requirements. Also, you have the tally sheet, and one of the responsibilities of the business analyst is seeking the solutions and finding the way that the problems are solutioned or improved by in the existing process. And in order to achieve this improvement in daily operations, you need to monitor the issues and how frequently they appear. So we use the tally sheet. We have the CPOC document, that is a high-level view of the suppliers, the inputs, the process, the outputs, and the customers you have in the project development. The epoch template, and you can use an epoch template, and you have also the data flow diagram, the use case diagram, the CRUD template, and you have to also to use other tools like the value proposition canvas when you used to work towards or analyze the match between customer expectations and the product features with this canvas. And you can also use experience maps when you link personas and needs, gains, and everyday opportunities you have in the business and capabilities we require, so we want to explode, or the capabilities we want to retire. There are also other techniques that we already talk about, like the SWOT analysis and other kind of analysis, and data mining and decision taking. There's a lot of techniques that you need to implement, and it depends of each situation that you are managing in that moment. The question number 4 is, how can you say that a requirement is good? Okay, part of the main task of a business analyst is to acquire the requirements and write down the requirements. So this requirement must accomplish some of the specifications, some characteristic that I'm going to read. The first one is the unambiguous. You have to have a requirement that has the details and has all the correct sentence that you can understand perfectly what is needed, that it doesn't have any room for any doubts or thinking double ideas about what is required. Also, you need that the requirement can be testable or verifiable, and that means that you have to write down what exactly do you want, because you need to have a way to verify that your requirement can be tested in that way. The requirements should be clear, should be concise, should be terse, simple, and precise. So that helps to implement the requirement, and must be done in a perfect way, and with a clear statement. You have a clear way to fulfill that requirement. Also, the requirement has to be correct. That means if you have a fact in the requirement, the fact should be correct. The requirement should be understandable. That means that has to be clear, that you understand or other people understand what is needed. Should have all the details to give the precise and to be understandable. But also the requirement should be feasible, realistic, possible to do, possible to implement. And a requirement should be independent also. A good requirement does not depend from other requirement. If that happens, you don't have a good requirement. Should be atomic. That means that should be unique. That it could be individual requirement. And also you need that your requirement must be necessary, because some of the times if you have a requirement and you remove that requirement and nobody complains and the stakeholder doesn't complain, it means that the requirement is not necessary, because also can happen that if you remove the requirement, it doesn't affect the functionality that you have. So it means that it is not a necessary requirement. And basically these are the characteristic of a good requirement. And also a good requirement should be implementation free. That means that requirements should not contain unnecessary design or implementation information or details. The requirements only states what is required, not how will be implemented. That means that it is implementation free, and also must be consistent. A good requirement must be consistent, and that means that there should not be any conflicts between the requirements. And basically, if you have that, you should be very clear that you are not writing a requirement that you already have documented, and that means also that you have a non-redundant requirement. A non-redundant requirement means that it is a requirement that should be expressed in different ways and could be not very understandable. Okay, that will be the way you can identify a good requirement. Okay, the question number 5 is, how can you explain a user-centered design methodology? Okay, first of all, as the name it says, the user-centered methodology has as a main and focus the user. All the development is based on the user, and it has the approach from different perspective, and in each phase, the most important is the user. So in each phase of the development, you need to answer several questions to proceed and to always keep the development focused on the user. You must or should answer the question like, who are the users of the product application? You need to answer also questions like, what are the user goals? What functions the user expect? Does the user have any similar experience with products like the one you are developing? How should the design of the product application support the users? And in each step you execute, you should always be thinking in the user, and you basically have to always be focusing in the user requirements and in the user goals or needs that they have already stated in the requirements you already gathered. Also, it's important to say that the after the deployment, in the post-deployment phase, you also be this methodology continues focusing in the user, in gathering information and feedback from the users. So it is mainly focused in all the information that the user can provide, and you can use different tools to acquire that information. You can in one of the scene stage that you have the research, you can use surveys, interviews, task analysis. You can use field observation, market segmentation to understand deeply your users. You can use also the persona development, and that will be answering the next question, what is a persona? And you also use the competitive analysis, and during the product design, you use storyboards, wireframes, low fidelity mockups, high fidelity mockups, and you also use screen flow diagrams. And during the design evaluation phase, you use style guide reviews, cognitive walkthroughs, heuristic evaluation, formative user testing, ergonomic evaluation, time and motion studies. Okay, thank you. And for the question number 6, how do you define personas? Okay, a persona is defined as a fictional character that has the exemplification or exemplifies the way a typical user interacts with a system or with a product. And the personas are helpful when there is a desire of understand the needs of the users by or a group of users. Although the user group are fictional characters, and you can define as much as the details you want to define for a persona, and you can use a number of techniques to acquire the information for these personas, and the personas are used as a focus centered to create stories or to create features of your product or your develop whether you are with what you are developing. And basically the personas allows to the reader to see the story from the point of view of the stakeholder group, and the personas also help bringing the user to life. So you can have a persona that like a user, you can think a persona like a user that is going to execute certain function or task in our product or with our product. Okay, this is the question number 7. What is a Pareto analysis? A Pareto analysis refers to the application of the Pareto principle that is a decision-making technique, and the Pareto principle explains that the 80/20 is like a rule that is used with the context of quality or defect resolution, and suggests this Pareto technique or Pareto principle that 20% of the factors may reflect the 80% of the expected product or the expected results that you are waiting. So Pareto analysis and the Pareto principle can also be applied in the broadly scenarios, and the result is also a 80/20 distribution, and the people finds that the 20% of the overall work that plant, by example, produce, this effort typically achieves the 80% of the work of the production goal. Okay, the Pareto analysis plots the distribution of events in standard Pareto chart. The Pareto chart, named as Wilfredo Pareto, consists of a bar chart and a line graph. The bar chart shows the frequency of the events along the left-hand side, the Y, and while the event types are plotted in descending order of frequency along of the x-axis. Then the cumulative total of the event occurrences are plotted as a line graph and overlaid on top of the bar graph with the cumulative percentage listed along the right-hand side y-axis. Okay, this is the question number 8. How do you manage frequently changing customers' requirements while deploying any system? Okay, it is very important to tell that in any project, despite you are using waterfall or agile methodology, you will always have changes, or you will always have a request of changes coming from the customers or from the stakeholders. In both cases, agile or waterfall, you need to, as a business analyst, you need to establish a very precise steps to do these changes. And in the case of agile, you implement, you write down the new requirements into the backlog, product backlog, and you evaluate how important is this change, and if it is a critical change, you move this requirement that has to be converted in the user story, and you put it upper and maybe in the top if it has a high criticality. In both cases, in the waterfall also, you need to analyze the scope of the change, the time, the cost, the quality, the human resources that you are going to be using for this change, and you need to establish a communication with the project manager and start a change request, and if the change request is approved, you will start implementing these new changes. And as we know, the waterfall methodology is strict, is very tight, and in the case of the agile, and using the Scrum framework, in the product backlog, you can easily change, because that is the soul and the aim of the agile methodology. You use several iterations, and if you have a change, you can put that change in the backlog, in the product backlog, and then you can prioritize it and move it to a new story and into a new iteration, and you can decide if it's urgent to doing a SAP. For the question number 9, how can you handle and manage difficult stakeholders? Okay, first of all, based on the experience I have, the most important way to manage any kind of stakeholders is by implementing a good communication plan. The communication is the base to achieve all the goals you want, not only with the stakeholders, also among all the team members that are collaborating in the development of any project or any product or any software or system. So you have to also accept the authority of the stakeholders, and you need to avoid fighting with the stakeholders, because what you really want to do is to achieve the goal of your project, not to fight against the other stakeholders. And if you have any negative emotions, you need to remove it, and you need to be professional and focus on what you want. We need to have the capacity to understand why they are putting any resistant to change or being hardly to treat with the stakeholders, and we need to ask to them for advice and try to listen and understand why they are fighting again what we are proposing or what is causing a conflict. Also, we need to be honest and to have tact when we are talking with them or communicating with them, in the case we are using emails or any other communication technique. And it is very important, as I stated in the beginning, to tailor the communication. We need to polish and to work day by day in every conversation, email, chat we have to improve our communication, because the communication is the basis to achieve our goals and to have all the stakeholders and all the people working in this project and to achieve achieve the goals we are, and to finalize as soon as possible and with 100% of performance our projects. For the question number 10, how can you differentiate a risk and an issue? Okay, well, basically an issue is a problem that happened or is happening. So when you have an issue, you need to, as soon as possible, to find a way to fix it and fix it. And for risk, there is a wide information about how to manage a risk. First of all, in the project management and PM book of knowledge, we have all a chapter regarding the risk management plan and how we should be facing the risk. I have to say that a risk is an issue that can happen or cannot happen, and also a risk is an issue that, if happens, can be harmful for the project or could be beneficial for the project. So say that we can have also a plan to mitigate any risk in case the risk comes true, and you have to fight that risk. And now it's an issue and you have to resolve it. So you have a risk management plan to mitigate risks. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this interview and in applying to this position. Thank you very much.